In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. When I was a seminarian, I spent Holy Week at a wonderful parish in East London. Now, the East End of London isn't any... by the way, I'm going to check you can hear, because I know this microphone, you have to really lean in. You can, good. Now, the East End is no longer full of people who speak like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins. That's if you think Dick Van Dyke sounded like a Cockney from the East End. It was a slightly strange accent. Now, most of the houses there, rather than being the houses of the poor as they were for dockers, are worth £1 million, £2 million, that is, or more. But there are just a few Cockneys left. And in this parish was one of the few remaining proper Cockneys. And this man was one of the one I'm thinking of, was one of those few remaining people as well who still went to church day in, day out. He was there every day for morning prayer and evening prayer. And in this Holy Week, he was there for every single service. He must have been there for 30-odd services that week. And I gave one of the addresses. I was really nervous about doing it. It was one of the first times I had spoken in a church. And I spent a whole day preparing a 5-minute address. And then afterwards, he was really grateful. He came up to me and said how good it was. And I, being slightly green in my role and being naturally patronizing and condescending, said to him, "Oh, no, this is about everyone who shows up. It's not just about me showing up and saying what I've got to say," or words to similar sickening effect. But he stopped me, and he had the confidence to say to me, "Nonsense, you are here to show us Jesus." And he pointed to the crucifix which was on the top of the rood screen. This was a massive barn of a church, and there was a crucifix, probably, 8 feet tall on the top of the rood screen looking down at us. And he told me, "You are here to show us Jesus." I'm not going to try to do a Cockney accent myself, you might have noticed. Now, the job description of a priest is sufficiently vague and diverse that it can be easy to forget this core duty that we have to show us Jesus. And, of course, as I said sanctimoniously, that isn't actually just the duty of a priest. That is the duty of all of us to show us Jesus. Now, Epiphany, the name of today's feast, really means showing or showing forth. That's all it means. It means showing, because we're celebrating today the showing of Jesus to the world. And the wise men, the Magi are coming to see Jesus, but primarily we're celebrating the showing of Jesus. So rather than just emphasizing one bit of the Christmas story, just being a kind of tacked on end of the Christmas story, we are in fact celebrating Jesus being shown to the world. And believe it or not, Christmas was a feast that came after the feast of the Epiphany. So Epiphany was started as a feast, and later on people thought, we should probably celebrate the birth of Jesus as well. So they added on Christmas. But Epiphany is older as a feast than Christmas. So today we're celebrating the real feast. Christmas started in the 300s, and the Feast of the Epiphany was started in the 200s before that. But the thing I really love about the Feast of the Epiphany is the glimpse it gives us of the variety of people who were in the Near East at the time of the birth of Jesus. Now, we might think that we live in a cosmopolitan world and we celebrate the diversity of our community here in the Twin Cities. But the world of the Near East, of the Mediterranean, in the time of the birth of Jesus, was so much more cosmopolitan than the world that we are living in now. We looked at this a little bit in our faith forum on Jonah, way back before Advent. And Jonah, the book, is written a few hundred years before the birth of Jesus. But remember, probably back to your school time, hearing of the story of Jonah. Jonah goes to the port of Joppa, which was just a few miles from Jerusalem. And he gets a ride, doesn't he? He hitches a ride to take him way out west across the Mediterranean. And one little detail in that story tells us something about that world, because the sailors ask him, "Which God do you worship? Which God do you worship?" You might think that's really obvious because they're just a few miles from Jerusalem. But there were so many peoples around the port at that time that you couldn't make any assumptions about where people were from, because there were people from all religions, all ethnicities, spread out and mixed up around the Mediterranean. We get another glimpse of this world in the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. Who here knows that story of the Ethiopian eunuch? Put your hand up if you remember that. The Ethiopian eunuch, we're not told why he was there, because the teller of the story, Luke, thinks it's perfectly obvious that you will have Ethiopian eunuchs from Africa, non-Jews, riding along in their chariots around what we now call the Holy Land. And aside from the fact that he was there, this eunuch was reading the scroll of Isaiah. He was just standing in his chariot as he was going along reading from the scroll of Isaiah, because he was an African who was curious about the religion of the Jews. And the writer of Acts simply took that for granted. And now here we have our star-gazing wise men from the East, probably Persia, seeking the King of the Jews. So rather than every culture and religion keeping to themselves, these few glimpses show us a world in which people thought they would find truth in each other's faiths, in which they might mix and match, in which people of one faith or tradition might take something from another's and incorporate it into their own. This fits not just with these stories, but then with Gentiles later starting to follow Jesus in larger numbers, particularly once Paul began his ministry. Now, the classic view of Greek and Roman religion is, of course, that there were various gods whom you would turn to for various things, or would adopt particularly one for your own household or city, and make offerings to them rather than to the others. But overall, you believed in a pantheon of gods. And that's what the word pantheon means, in fact. It means a range of gods. So far, so true. And yet, in the world at the time we are talking of, something was shifting. The world was starting to change. Something was bubbling up. And this change started to come as well as from the world we're in a Jewish world where a son is born into it, a son of God, was a world that was already shifting in the Greek world, because Plato was already writing about the one. There was an idea of one God rather than many starting to bubble away. This idea of one great unifying being or God was starting to take off beyond just the Jewish world. And many Greeks and Romans had started to think of Zeus or Jupiter as being the real God, and all those other gods being slightly in between characters. And so this monotheism, this belief in one God in the Jewish world, which had been seen as really eccentric. This was the thing that made Judaism stand out, was starting to become something that was more attractive to people beyond the Jewish faith, beyond the people of Israel. Hence why these people, these magi we are talking about today, these people who were not Jewish, were starting to get interested in this strange Jewish world and in who this King of the Jews might be. So when we hear about Jews and Gentiles, we might equally talk about Jews and seekers, about Jews and searchers. This is the world we are coming into as we celebrate Epiphany this morning. And just as today, in a time of uncertainty and flux, in a time where the empires of the world did not offer meaning and hope to many of those on the margins, there were people casting around for meaning elsewhere. And if you think about it, instead of all those debates about the role of circumcision and following Jewish food laws between Peter and Paul, and that debate between Jews and Gentiles being something we're used to hearing about in the New Testament, surely the prior question was how those searchers from further afield might actually understand who Jesus was, and how the first Christians might have described or translated the hope that was in them to those coming from a different culture and coming with a different cultural grammar. This task is nothing new, and our magi grasping and searching in the darkness, but nevertheless following confidently the light which they had just found, are only the first of those searchers to find Jesus, looking for meaning without necessarily knowing what they are looking for. And going back to Acts again, do you remember that story of Paul coming to the Areopagus in Athens? And this was a temple where there was a strange altar which didn't have the name of one god on it, which people were worshipping. Instead, perhaps trying to cover their own bases, the Greeks had written to an unknown god. And Paul, when he came to try to address the followers of this unknown god, said, "You have been addressing this one God all along, who made of the same blood all the peoples of the earth, that they should seek the Lord, if perhaps they might reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us." Now, we could take all of these stories and the place of our faith within this strange cultural mix as meaning that we have the key to the truth, and all these other people searching have finally found it by coming to worship the same God as us. But to me, this demonstrates that Jesus himself has in fact given these people from afar, these people who may come from a different or no tradition, the same yearning for God and a knowledge of him, of Jesus, in the power of the Spirit, which we too would do well to learn from. After all, in our story for this morning, should not Herod know the most about the prophecy of the Messiah and be seeking him? And yet he would only find Jesus to destroy him. It takes these searchers from afar to show the people of Jerusalem, the people of Bethlehem, who this Jesus is who has come to be the King of the Jews. It takes the strangers, the searchers, with their freshness of faith and its sheer physical attraction, drawing them across the sands of the desert, even up our own steps and through our red doors, to reveal this King to those in whose midst he has been born. And as we begin this new year, it's no accident that we go outside our doors this morning to bless our church and bless our doors. Let us similarly listen to the new voices coming from beyond our own walls and beyond our experiences, being drawn to find meaning beyond themselves. And let us listen for what it is they are searching for, and learn to treasure again what is most essential of our faith. Jesus born among us, God with us, born as one of us, as one of the least of us. And whatever might be jading our own weary eyes, let those who are searching and finding for the first time what we only hold in earthen vessels show us the Jesus whom we thought we knew, as if for the first time. And let that be all of our prayer, in the name of that Jesus whom those men from afar found in that manger with their fresh eyes. And may their fresh eyes be our fresh eyes this Epiphany. Amen.